Bem, boa tarde a todas e a todos. A sessão está a ser gravada, por isso eu estar ao microfone. Obrigado pela vossa presença. Como veem, numa semana de interrupção letiva na área das artes, a presença de todos é ainda mais importante para bem acolhermos o nosso convidado desta sessão, que abre a terceira temporada deste ciclo chamado Great Artists on Campus, que queremos que seja cada vez mais uma sala de encontro, de reflexão da cidade de Lisboa, que acontece por iniciativa de uma universidade, mas aberta à cidade, sempre com entrada gratuita. E por isso passem a palavra, por favor, porque é um trabalho de todos construirmos cidade. E o Great Artists on Campus quer ser um contributo ativo para essa qualificação da vida cultural na nossa cidade. Eu vou fazer uma breve apresentação em inglês do Philippe Van Cauteren e depois passo-lhe imediatamente a palavra. O Philippe Van Cauteren vai-nos falar de arte contemporânea num sentido muito largo e rizomático, vão entender porquê, e no final haverá, como habitualmente, 20, 30 minutos para perguntas e respostas e um debate com a plateia. Philippe Van Cauteren is the artistic director of S.M.A.K in Ghent, Belgium. Under his leadership, the exhibition program has primarily focused on significant monographic exhibitions of leading artists. His particular interest in art in public spaces was evident in the international exhibition Track 2012, which he organized in Ghent together with Miriam Varadinis, curator at Kunsthaus from Zurich. At the 55th edition of the Venice Biennale from the Pavilion of Belgium, he was the co-curator of the exhibition Krippelhout, featuring, I'm sorry my accent, works by Berlinda de Buiker. In 2015, Philippe Van Cauteren was appointed by the Ruya Foundation as the curator of the Pavilion of Iraq at the 56th edition of the Venice Biennale. The exhibition Invisible Beauty was also presented at S.M.A.K in 2016 and in Erbil, Iraq in 2017. Invited by the Siddhartha Arts Foundation, he curated the exhibition My City, My Studio, My City, My Life for the Kathmandu Art Triennale 2017. He showcased works by over 50 artists from approximately 25 countries, with Belgium-born artists like Francis Alice as the patron artist. Philippe Van Cauteren previously worked as an independent curator and art critic, organizing exhibitions in Chile, Brazil, Mexico, and Germany. He regularly writes and lectures about contemporary art. Okay, I did my best in my English. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Philippe Van Cauteren, for accepting our invitation. And it's an honor to have you as our guest for the first talk of our cycle. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I apologize that I don't speak Portuguese. I speak Portuguese with my dogs, but which says a bit about the quality of the Portuguese I master. When I hear like these biographies, it's always a bit a sad thing. It looks as if you're dead. It could also be just like saying, okay, Philippe Van Cauteren drinks coffee in the morning. First wakes up, takes care of people, and in the evening goes to sleep. And in the meantime, he doubts and is uncertain about many things. And does this day after day, after day, after day, after day. That could be also a kind of nice and gentle introduction. But happy to be here in this wonderful place, in this incredible city, which is very meaningful to me. For personal reasons in which I will not dive into. But before starting, maybe just a bit more where I come from. And I come from... Oei. Doesn't work yet. And just where I come from, it's from there. The city of Ghent. And I thought the best way to illustrate it is with an artwork from the collection of the museum. Work by Jorge Maki, Air de Gand, the air or the brief of Ghent. Ghent is not a metropole, it's a small city. It has 250,000 inhabitants. It's a medieval city with a very vivid artistic life and art and academical community. It has more than 6 museums run by the city itself. So it's a kind of pocket metropolis with every problem that the metropole has, but on a kind of manageable scale. And it's quite exceptional, we have to say, that a museum as S.M.A.K is there, and this I have to honor everything to my predecessor, Jan Hoet, who some of you might know as the leader of Documenta 9 in 1992, who was capable to realize an incredible collection in this provincial city, Ghent, where also is the Mystic Lamp, the fantastic masterpiece of the brothers Van Eyck of 1432. But where is in this little city, there is a museum with, from the onset in 1957, ambitions which were international and a focus which was international. And also which was a place where from the onset, from the beginning, the city was a kind of a focal point in the operations of the museum. You have to know, this is not a project which has been dropped in the city of Ghent by governments, and I say it in plural because Belgium has like 5 or 6 governments, but it was an initiative in 1957 by the citizens, by people believing in art, by collectors and other people who believed in a certain idea of making art accessible and making art democratic, as good as it can. So that's the place where I live, and that's the museum where I'm taking care of. S.M.A.K, Municipal Museum for Contemporary Art. I just, as a starting point, share you this list, not to impress or not whatever, but just to say that as a museum we have a major focus on solo exhibitions, individual exhibitions which are mostly produced together with the artists. And this is also the core of the whole institution, that we try to put the artist as central as possible in all the activities of the museum. And I didn't bring many images today, only 4 or 5, but some of them are meaningful, and the 2 next images are a kind of pendant, a kind of a diptych. On the one hand, you see the entrance of the museum within the background, a fantastic mural by Louis Weinberger, the few years ago deceased Austrian artist. And on the other hand, we have an image with the work created by Amrit Karki for the Kathmandu Triennial in 2017, which is a rectangle being painted on different houses on a slope in the periphery of the city of Kathmandu. And I brought these 2 images already to have a kind of the span between the museum and on the other hand, the relation with reality, the relation with society, which is a bit the pendulum in which we try to work, and on which I try to elaborate in this talk. And this image is just a very nice one. It was an art project in the museum with a pedestal, but then a group of students, young artists, decided just to turn the pedestal and just to jump in the pedestal. And I think it's a wonderful image in the sense that by the end we're all in the same boat, even if the boat is a cube. Or we're all in the same cube, even if the cube is a boat. Or we can also think on different variations. So everything I tried to elaborate on today are thoughts and ideas which starts from my personal experience as a museum person, but which could also be thoughts and ideas relevant for other perspectives or from other point of views that one can have in the artistic field or in society or whatever. And just this little sentence, the pleasure to put things next to each other and to look at it, it's a wonderful, beautiful phrase applicable to what is exhibition making, but also applicable to what is doing a lecture, but also applicable to what is a conversation on a bus, but also applicable just in encountering people. It's a very simple sentence, and I'm really a bit jealous that I didn't find it myself. But it's written by Edmund de Waal in his wonderful book Letters to Camondo. And you know, this is a sentence that I think, okay, if I would make a kind of synthesis of what I do on a daily basis, a part of drinking coffee and eating and what I was like summarizing a second ago, then I think it's exactly this. And I think the word pleasure is of course something which is of a big importance. That's, I think, as we're spending a lot in the things we're doing, pleasure is something we should try to look at or to maximize as much as possible. 11 thoughts on the contemporary art world or on the art field. As you see it starts with 11, so which means we were counting down. So which gives you, when you get bored, it gives you already a good perspective to know, okay, still 3 or 4 numbers to go. But at the other hand, at the bottom of this page, there are also numbers who go from 1 to 11. So in total there are 22 things, and the other ones are also just 11. And I will mostly elaborate on the central ones and less on the other ones. The other ones have a kind of very specific origin, and just each time I will read them aloud without giving any comment. Maybe at the end I can elaborate where they came from, or why they are there, or why they are around. And they are like ideas or invitations to think about, or things to do, or things to refuse to do. So know that everything is uncertain, and which connects, of course, with a first larger question, the changing role of museums. Something, you know, first of all, on the one hand, we have this kind of traditional and, you know, internationally discussed and agreed upon definition of what a museum can be by the ICOM, International Council of Museums. And it's about research and collect and conserve and distribute and, you know, to be inclusive and accessible for public and which is, of course, a very valid and important tool, as it makes a kind of a level for everyone who's dealing in one way or another with museum affairs. But at the other hand, we may not forget that we do face realities, and I say them in plural because the reality that we face as a museum in Belgium is different than Portugal, or is different than Nepal, or is different than whatever country. But at the same time, within this kind of very specific local context, there are also a lot of elements which are happening at the same time, at the same moment, maybe in different degrees, but which are of course affecting strongly the kind of theoretical and ideal definition of what the role of a museum can and should be. And of course I'm referring to the changing political climate. I should not elaborate on this. We do know that all over in Europe and many other places we see a kind of tendency, a certain tendency, whereby of course in the case of Belgium or Flanders, you see a kind of tendency with more attention to heritage, and everything which has to do or relates to contemporary art is of a secondary importance. We also see that in the field of contemporary art, there is a kind of financial hysteria, you know, which means that often you see that there is not only one art world, but there are only not two art worlds, but yet you see a kind of within the contemporary art world, 5 or 6 parallel art worlds, whereby the one has sometimes nothing to do with the other, and where like the monetary mechanism is of a big importance. And then of course an important changing context is the demographical one. You will notice that in my whole talk I do not mention words which are often used by colleagues of mine. I try to bring up other vocabularies in order to leave things as open as possible, and in order not to narrow down things. So demography could also be read as globalization or as diversity or as inclusion and so on and so on. But demography can also maybe comes from my background as a sociologist. That demography was some field in which I've been deeply interested. And then last, another element of this changing context is a word which I tried to summarize as, and I have to exercise to pronounce it, it's like a neologism, surfacialization or something like this, which brings us back to the obsession with surface, with a kind of current against things which take time, kind of idea against depth, like fast consumption, not spending too much time with things. You could also relate it to social media, of course, and these things. But this kind of addiction to surfaces is something that is really part of the changing role of museums. The question then is, how can you marry, or how can you bring together this international definition on the one hand, this kind of theoretical applicable framework on what a museum should be, and at the same time, how could you take into account the changing context in which we are operating today? What could be the future perspectives? And that is exactly in the 10 next chapters to come. There will be fragments of answers, or maybe even more questions than answers. But that's a bit a kind of daily, daily preoccupation I have when entering the museum in the morning and when leaving the museum in the evening. Wondering how the museum now, today, in the future, because now you have to prepare it for future plans, how can you make it apt? How can you make it adapt? How can you make it kind of strong against this kind of very complex, changing and fast-changing world? At the end, I will refer to the building project that we're working on, and I explained to João this morning or at noon that we are already working on it about 20 years. Which is a long time and a short time at the same time. But at the same time, we do know that in other parts of the world, museums are built within 3 or 4 years, or popping up like supermarkets or gas stations or something like this. A first thing, which is, of course, not to be underestimated, and has to be scrutinized strongly. And first I read the number 2 of the bottom: learn to live with your prejudices or try to get rid of them. Is the relation between museum and politics. If I can connect this, and I formulate this in a gentle way between the atmosphere of intervention or the atmosphere of neglect, with a slight preference for neglect than for intervention. But the best position would somewhere in between. That politics would be a kind of have an attitude of neglective interventionism or something, or interventionist neglecticism, something in between these two elements. And then the larger question about the autonomy of the museum: is it a fact? Is it like this? Is the museum really autonomous? Or is it some goal that we should try to achieve within the current context which we are living in? I can talk from a very lucky position. Flanders, Belgium, goes through a kind of remarkable political wave. The city of Ghent, on the contrary, in his kind of smallness, and has a kind of delicate political position. And then delicate can be named that since a long period of time, Ghent as an enclave, surrounded by other positions in other cities, is a place where there is room for progressive thinking, there is room for innovation, there is room for contemporary art or contemporary culture. thanks to the fact that the policy makers, or that the city hall, the mayor and his deputies, have for a long time been to be kind of situated more in the progressive part of the political spectrum, which means that there is a kind of support to the museum, a support and an understanding to culture, which is way beyond to what can be remarked in other parts of the country. And I can give you like a very small example of this, which makes it clear. Not that long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, we organized an exhibition with the Swiss artist Christoph Büchel, an artist of whom most projects are cancelled amidst the process of making the exhibition, or do not happen because of financial reasons, or that the museum direction steps back, or that the local authorities are not giving the permission to make it happen. And in a nutshell, the project of Christoph was a reflection on the colonial past of Belgium. As you know, Congo was a Belgian colony till 1960. And his reflection was not only on the colonial past, but also on the context of the park where the museum is, which was also the park of a world exhibition in 1913. But he was also reflecting on the current refugee crisis and the kind of political failure of the national and federal authorities. And therefore, part of the project, he wanted that during the time frame of 4 months, 13 refugees were living day and night in the museum, which means when the staff of the museum arrived in the morning, the 13 refugees were also already there, and which means that by the end of the day, the refugees were still staying in the museum. I think if you would propose something like this to Centre Pompidou in Paris, or let's say Ludwig Museum in Cologne, or I don't know which institution in Portugal, that in most cases the answer would be no. That in most cases you would even not have the time to ask the question. You would even not be able to put the proposal on the table. But a fantastic thing, and which relates to the politics of the city, is that instead of denying the project, and instead of judging the project from the outside, from the very beginning, the local administrations and the local city council embraced the project, and were even making it more possible than ever, making it more possible than the artist wanted it. So instead of seeing some works as a problem, or some artistic positions as a problem, the city accepts that maybe the function of the museum is also to be a kind of place of ambiguity, a place of kind of where questions should be put on the table before that would be answered beforehand. And so, which means that I think that, from my perspective, the autonomy as such is not a goal, but that within that today, anno 2025, I think the kind of interrelation to all these words that I've been putting here is actually the notion of different forms or capacities of negotiation, which means trying to not to deny any forms of hierarchy, but to try to make a kind of a landscape, to see the museum as part of a landscape, and seeing it as part of a landscape where also the other voices, or the voices who are not sharing with you the point of view that you think, okay, this should be happening, to make part of it and to accept this as part of the kind of negotiation. The board of the museum, for instance, is including the whole political spectrum which is happening today in Belgium, which means that also there are representatives of the extreme right-wing party, and all the centrum parties, and also the extreme left-wing parties, which is also kind of which is positive in that sense, that as a museum you have also to deal, they are represented because they reflect for whom people have been voting. So which means also in the dialogue that you have with your board, or in the dialogue that you have with the administrations, you immediately also dialogue with a kind of stratification of the society as and of your visitors as they're pronounced in the current moment. I do think, though, that it's very important to be very alert, to have the ears and the eyes wide open, to also how to say, to not compromise yourself in certain forms of negotiation, and to kind of consider the museum as a space where other logics, independent which one they are, might be applicable in relation to what happens in the surroundings around the museum. For us also, the visit of the museum does not start when you enter the museum, but basically the visit starts when you leave the museum. So in the sense that we do hope that the museum could also be a kind of, and this will come later also, as a kind of transformative space, as a space where we hope that by seeing the things that you get offered in forms of exhibitions and other forms, and also the way you're being addressed when you buy a ticket and so on and so on, that this is something which you take home, which you take into your own social environments and places. And talking about transformative elements, something I wanted to address is like the link between museums and activism. And I wanted to do this with a very with a case, a known proper experience that we did. Everyone is familiar with Extinction Rebellion, like the activists who glue themselves to artworks, or who had gets the soup on the mayo in Prado, or someone who was like gluing himself to the painting of Van Eyck in Bruges, and plenty of examples all over Europe. And so this happened in Belgium, and I was approached by a journalist wondering if the museum would now take extra security measures to put more guards, to have more control at the entrance of the museum, to control your bags and stuff. And the answer was no. I said no, we do not want more guards. Maybe on the contrary, we want less guards. What do we want? What do we want is dialogue, dialogue and curiosity, which means that we started to have a conversation with Extinction Rebellion, wondering why they were doing the things, and trying to mostly put to the front that we share common values, that we are not different. It was difficult. We have the Museum Council in Belgium, or in Flanders, where all the museum directors are around the table. And when I took the position in defense of Extinction Rebellion, I was like being looked as an iconoclast, as someone who's in favor of destruction and so on and so on. But not as someone who was favoring dialogue and who was favoring, trying to see, okay, what can we do together, or what it means to do, what does it mean? And trying to go beyond the idea of judging. I had this sentence on the prejudice, not having a prejudice toward the activists, but trying to be interested in them. And the main reason why to be interested is that we share the same concern, and the same concern is that we are both dealing or having an interest in fragility and decay. On the one hand, the fragility and decay of nature and the climate and the ecological, but at the same time, we as museum or people working in the cultural field, we are also worried, and we are also like afraid about the future of the importance of contemporary culture and the future of art, and the sense that there is a kind of more like neoliberal idea of how a museum should be run and so on and so on. We are worried about the values that I've been describing earlier. So instead of being opposites, I thought, okay, it's good to bring us to talk to the activists and to sit together. And instead of closing the doors, opening them even more open than you can. Which means that when the activists were starting protests in front of the museum, when they were occupying the streets of Ghent, we, 9 o'clock in the morning, they started, the museum was still closed. We made sure that the museum was already open at 9 o'clock to welcome them, so they could go to the toilet, that they could do everything they needed. And also we tried, we invited them to the museum council. We invited them to a symposium in order that their voice could be also used and listened to us, institutional people who like to think in strict frameworks and who don't like to think in the kind of very flexible and open and nomadic way of thinking of activists. And even at a certain point, we decided the room that you saw in the beginning with the cube, which is a boat, which is a cube, we decided to offer them the space in the museum. And we wanted to give them like carte blanche. We said, okay, during 4 weeks, this space is yours. You can do what you like in the space. But we do it in dialogue. We speak to each other. We listen to each other. And we try, I think we can learn from you. And you can also understand and learn from us, knowing what a museum is and what it means to take care of collections and of heritage and things like this. And we involved the team of the museum, and we started up, they were also giving like training lessons, what to do if the police attacks you, and all fascinating, interesting things. But I have to admit, at a certain moment of time, we had to stop the project, and for a specific simple reason, and which is maybe what you might think unimportant, or which you might think it's silly or whatever. And this reason has to do with trust. So the relation that we opened up towards the activists to extinction, and the weekly meetings we had and the investment we did, was not based on a kind of contract or an agreement, but was based on trust. And trust means involves also respect. And of course, you can try to define it what it is, but mostly it's something which is between the words, or which is a bit unwritten. And at a certain moment of time, I was interviewed for an article in the newspaper with the question why I took the defense of Extinction Rebellion. And in the same article, Extinction was interviewed about what they were planning to do the museum. And they saw their explanation was, okay, now we're going to occupy the museum, and finally we reached the goal that we don't have to glue ourselves anymore, and so on and so on, which was completely not in sync with the intentions we had in our daily meetings and conversations, and which also meant that we didn't continue the project, and we stopped the project. We stopped it. Why? Because the idea of the trust between us has been stopped, has been aborted, unfortunately. But which for me doesn't mean that you cannot start over, because it's a learning process, I think, how that, and we will have to do it more and more, how as an institution you're capable to do a solid embracement or a solid dialogue with activist positions. And I still take the same position, and I still can advise every museum to do so, to be more open-minded, and also to try to learn of it, in the sense that I think the way the activists are organized, if you compare this to how a museum is organized, we're a staff of 45 people with procedures and rules and so on and so on. I think for the future of the museum, we should be really be more inspired by how activists are organizing themselves and how they achieve their goals, instead of being in this kind of overwhelming, repetitive, and always augmenting bureaucratic approach of things. So am I an activist myself? I don't know. I don't think I'm courageous enough. But I have a big sympathy and a lot of. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of this whole process, and it's a coincidence that the number 9 and 3 cope well, and I didn't intend this, but the sentence say, be interested in these things that appear to be uninteresting. I think that's a kind of something we suffer in the art world, that we mostly are only interested in the things in which we are interested. I try to exercise myself to go to see exhibitions in which I'm not interested. You know, it's easy to go to see things you like, and it's like, you know, it's like confirming your visions or your taste or your perspective. But it's more interesting sometimes to go and see things where you're not interested in at all. Same is true for music, same is true for books, same is true for many things. Of course, sometimes afterwards you have to admit it's a waste of time. But at the same time, it's a good exercise to keep your way of being and your way of thinking flexible. Be lazy and inefficient. Yes, be lazy and inefficient. Which brings us to museums and its publics. We live, I started to say this something a bit in the beginning, when I was mentioning this neologism, this word I invented, which I'm not going to repeat. But we are in a culture where the visitor wants instant gratification, where it's about experience and about, you know, fast consumption. Whereby there is this beautiful sentence of Paul Gauguin, who once said that it takes a visitor 10 seconds to look at a work, or 15 seconds to look at a work, but it takes artists years and years and years in order to achieve the work that he or she realized. But we see that exhibitions, you know, we do all efforts to make the best exhibitions and produce text and the right way to display the works and so on and so on. But we do see that the public is like a kind of, you know, it would be even too poetic to call them butterflies, but they are jumping from one thing to the other, and not paying attention to the effort that the museum or, you know, the curator or the art center has been making. So the question is not to try to not to have a judgment about this, not to say, okay, how bad that we're in this kind of world or society, but trying to wonder for which kind of publics are we working? Who do we want to bring to the museum? And once the people are there, how could we stretch this time span of attention? How could we make sure that, you know, the time frame that people spend in an exhibition is not half an hour, but could be doubled, or let's say even maybe 3 minutes more. Let's start realistic, even 3 minutes more. And then I think one of the core elements is that there is a kind of permanent, and I think talking to colleagues all around, I think it's a kind of universal international friction. There is this kind of tension between, on the one hand, the curation and the making of the exhibition, and on the other hand, everything which deals and has to do with the mediation of an exhibition. And the debate about these things is mostly this kind of juxtaposition between, on the one hand, and it's a false juxtaposition according to me, on the one hand, the experts and the public as expert, or the expert public, and on the other hand, the larger public, which has different expertise, which according to me has the same expertise but comes in with a different. And the debate between this friction that I mentioned is always being reduced to these two kind of things. And as long as we keep on doing and looking at this kind of dichotomy of these two elements, of course, the culture of gratification and the culture of immersive experience will be extending, because thanks to this kind of permanent discussion that you're having, you generate a kind of opening for others in order to provide exhibitions which are in this logic of this experience and this immersiveness. The solution, according to me, is multifold, and there are different answers. And I think the solution is that, and that's what we try to do, that we try to define not only publics in terms of the people who are visiting the museum, but that you also try to make projects or set up things whereby a number of people or a certain percentage of your visitors are not seen as public but as users. You might think, okay, what a kind of uninteresting semantic game is this? But I think it's a big difference between the public or defining public or defining something as user. And I exemplify this, for instance, with the fact that we decided under the name S.M.A.K beweegt, which means S.M.A.K moves, to set up a panoply, a whole set. And I think in total, in the meantime, there are like 20 to 25 projects. Some of them have a time frame of 3 months. Other ones have a time frame of 5 years or even longer, which deal with publics which you wouldn't directly connect with the core public of a museum for contemporary art. And this ranges from like one specific thing was a collaboration between a prison, youngsters between 16 and 18 years old, but not museum users, and thirdly some professional artists, like a kind of triangle that we have been building for a long period of time, whereby the idea was that notebooks, empty notebooks, were like traveling all the time between these 3 groups, between the prisoners and the youngsters and the artists, and then we were making meetings also in the prison and with the youngsters and from there on suddenly you constructed something which sounded which certainly looked to be something useful, something tangible, something practical almost, something which made sense, and which means that this kind of molecule that we were like developing was suddenly also something which was transforming our approach to the regular publics of the museum. And of course, if you're adding a number of these things, not only one like the one I mentioned now, but you multiply it by, a fair amount, of course, feasible with the means and the people that you have to do it, then suddenly you're not anymore in this kind of logic of expert and larger public. No, you try to approach a more complex stratification and demography of what the city or the people in the city could be. Of course, this involves schools, but of course, this also involves the fact that suddenly you give the museum out of hands. Often I see, and this also comes back later on, when we talk about education, I do think that most museums are investing in education, but it's something, often when they do them presentations of the educational department, mostly it's on the way to the toilet. It's like in the periphery. It's never taken really earnest. It's seldomly taken for granted. It's something like a side effect of a project or an exhibition, but it's never put in the center of the activities. Like a few years ago, we decided for half the exhibition space of the museum, which is 2,000 square meters, which is a big part, to have a collection exhibition, a presentation of the collection, but whereby the curators were ranging between 4 years and 18 years old, whereby the texts have been written by also people of that age group, whereby the press conference was done by people between this age group, where the rooms and the display of the rooms was done by the different age groups, where by the end the whole the whole agency of the exhibition making. Actually, we could be lazy and inefficient for a period of time. We were like unemployed for a period of time, and we could see how what effect this generated, in the sense that all of these people. So we had a core group of about 100 youngsters involved. And of course, they were accompanied. They were not just, they were guided a bit. But how this was like resonating in groups or with people where you would never imagine that that contemporary art could be resonating. So I think there it's important in terms of the public to dare and to have more audacity in terms of giving up, of you know, or of loss of control, of not wanting to have you know, every string in your hands. And you know, of course, you have like all this kind of gentle, very beautiful words of co-creation and all the, you know, other people can talk better about it than me. I refuse to think about it in these terms. I try to think on it in terms of horizontality, that you have to try to understand and to respect your public as someone who is sitting next to you, and not someone who's like sitting, who has more or less knowledge, who has more or better better understanding, who is more experienced or not. No, it's someone who is like, you can involve with other reasons in the thing that you do, and what you have to offer is the fact that you believe in what you do and what you show, and that you think that at a certain moment of time, in a certain place, because that's also important, that to understand what you do in a certain context. Like certain exhibitions we make in Ghent, imagine if I would be running a museum in Finland or Iceland or whatever, maybe certain project would not take place. So you have to understand the skin of the place, the sound, the texture, the capacity of a certain place. Like the project of Buchel would only be able in Ghent because of what Ghent means and what can be, and so it works in the kind of different ways. Consider success as an effect, not as a goal in itself. Museums and demography, I mentioned this already a bit beforehand, that for me demography resonates diversity and globalization. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think. By the end, the idea of the museum, and that's the thing which is very beautiful about it, and at the same time very annoying, namely that the concept or the idea of the museum is as solid since the first day of its invention, between brackets. And probably within this and 100 and 150 years, the concept of the museum will not change that much. Like the ICOM definition has been adapted recently, and okay, there have been added some elements in relation to the changing world, but the essence of the museum is still the same as back in those days. So the concept of the museum is something very conservative, something rigid, unchangeable, unmovable. And the question is, how can you make the museum more liquid, how can you make the museum more transparent, more adaptable, more... how could you build a museum out of cardboard, for instance? As a metaphor, how could you make a museum that is like a kind of a movable thing? And is, in that sense, capable of answering much better the changing world around us and the changing world of the city. I mean, the city of Ghent today is another city than 15 years or 20 years ago, which also means what is the relevance of the collection we have today, and how can we keep on making it relevant, or how can it be activated? What does it mean in terms of this changing demography? What does it mean in terms of the collection that you further development? And there is a kind of, it's like a, like a road, like a dead-end road. It's like a sens unique. There is no answer, and maybe that's also good that in this case there is no answer. The only answer is that the people will change, that the people working in the museum will change, that you know, that by the generations you will have a totally other way of thinking within the museum. But the fact before getting there is the question, how can you already prepare this today, as the museum is a very slow moving animal. It's very silent, slow, and hardly changing. But the changes we go through as society today, and name it in terms of the digital era and migration and the political things and so on and so on, go in such a speed and so fast that we're incapable to cope with it, but that at the same time, like local authorities do ask to cope with it. Like the local, the Deputy of Culture of Ghent, in December we already have museum night, and then we have like on the museum night 4,000 visitors, and then our Deputy of Culture, who is from Tunisian origin, then tells me, Philippe, you should have more diversity tonight. Yeah, as if it's like a product that you put in so the complexity that the museum is faced with, and also the fact that we are like strict and rigid in procedures, makes us incapable to answer certain quick changes. And maybe this can be compared, and it's also as a positive thing, like certain former third world countries, let's say, we have now a big advance and a big or much faster innovations than certain European countries. Thanks to this kind of slow development, I put it very briefly, and maybe the fact the slowness might make us apt to deal with certain things today with a delay of maybe one generation. But the question is, how can you now organize the museum in order that kind of in 10 or 15 years the next generation prospers of the anticipation of the changes. I think our new building, but I come to this in a second, might be kind of structural answer to this. But again, consider success as an effect, not as a goal in itself. Also in these things, I think we have to, the mandates of, the political mandates of the political adagios, which are often taught in terms of success and of numbers and of, like indicators, should be put aside. We should more focus on the destination, let's say. And then, of course, first, be conscious about the fact that we belong to a minority for whom art is meaningful. We tend to forget this. I often face this in our team, that we discuss things that then suddenly I think, okay, how nice that we have the luxury to discuss this, but is it that key or that important if we look just around the corner? But in terms of collection, a collection is of course the memory of the museum, and it's in our case it's a memory of utopias, but also a memory of failure and of incompleteness. This has to do with the small, almost non-existing, forever already, since '57, non-existing acquisition budget the museum has. If I would add the acquisition budget from, let's say, 76 to today and divide it over the years, I think that we have like then 50,000 a year or something, which is fantastic, which is good news, because it's meaningless to discuss or to complain about money. It's still there. There is still an effort, because it's the budget of the city, so the city still believes in it, even with little, but they still say, okay, it's important that the collection grows. But it's the memory of the biography of the museum, but it's also a memory of an era. It's a memory of a certain vision on art. But mostly, according to me, the question is also how to foresee a future for the collection. And there is also questions about conservation and how to do all these things with few means and few possibilities to store and to care and so on and so on. So how could you answer this? And also towards the world we're evolving, is collecting still the thing to do? Are there not other ways of collecting? Is making a museum collection not more a collection of attitudes, of which the artworks are the emanations of what the artist is? So don't you have like kind of parallel collections, which are like the kind of tangible collection and a kind of immaterial collection? And all this exercise, because it's an exercise, we tried to practice in 2005 with an acquisition by a work of the Brazilian in Porto born artist Arthur Barrio, who makes these huge ephemeral installations, situations he calls them. And he made a big installation for the museum with the coffee and all the ingredients he's using, but which only exist in the moment, not before and not after. And so we asked, so I asked Arthur if it was not possible to acquire this installation, this ephemeral installation. And at first he was a bit shocked, because he considered the question unusual, and also because mostly he thought, okay, people want something, you pay and you get something to put in a room or hang on a wall or put in a vitrine or whatever. And now we asked from Ghent to acquire something which would be gone after the exhibition, and which would be gone forever after he passed. But we insisted, so we acquired an installation called Interminavel, and also which means that there was a kind of unwritten contract or an unwritten agreement between the artist and the museum, that we tried to find moments to activate the installation again with the same ingredients but in a different form. So it was first time in Ghent, then it was in Japan, then it was back in Ghent, and last year it was in Guimarães. And so Arthur is getting older, and so we try maybe that we have one or two more iterations, and then it's done. And then there will be no trace of the piece, except maybe some photographs, but the piece will not be reconstructed. The piece will not be, will evaporate. And the acquisition was also, I think, was also acquiring a problem. In that sense, that for a collection team who likes to think in, who likes to put things in storages or in places, also in Excel sheets and all. I don't know how you call all these things, but who likes to order things and who likes to know these materials and this and what is the treatment and so on and so on. Suddenly we came with something which is not to be treated, which is not there to be restored, which cannot be reconstructed, which can be conserved. You cannot do nothing which you're used to do it every day. So suddenly you're trying to bring something in this collection, which is in a kind of almost like a kind of like a bacteria or something, something unwelcoming. And it took us some of the team. It took time in order to get to process this, and to maybe see this as a kind of opportunity towards how to deal also with other collection pieces that we have in the museum. And also, it's not against something; it's always in favor of something. For instance, also that's why I like to think of. I don't like to think of restoration and of conservation. We have like a strong department in the museum, but I like to think in terms of homeopathic and palliative care. I do think that in contemporary art, some artworks are made in certain materials which have a small time frame, which are not thought to last 20, 30, 40, 50, let's say, even not 100 years. And we do extremely a lot of efforts in order to preserve the things as they were and as they have been on the first day. As if I would sit here with no ritz and no gray hair. That would be, I don't know. And for instance, like with an example, we have this fantastic monumental piece of Panamarenko, this kind of genius artist, proto-scientist, thinker. He passed 5 years ago. He made a Zeppelin, Aeromodeller, in 1969. It's a huge piece, 35 meters. We can't show it nowhere. And the balloon of the Zeppelin is made in plastic. And we restored it already, because there were holes in it and stuff. But before he passed, when I spoke to Panamarenko, his answer was very clear about it. Namely, he said, just throw the original balloon of 69 and make a new one in plastic, which is better today, or another material. As long as the thing can fly, I'm fine with it, And that's this kind of also complex pendulum between this obsession we have between authenticity, but not the authenticity of the ideas or the attitude, but with the authenticity of materials. And of course, you have to judge this by every artist and every work and so on and so on. It's not a general thing that I want to put, but it's worth it to look at it and to accept that an artwork has has the same characteristics of a lifespan as a human being. That there is a moment that it's born and a moment that it stops. But that as a museum, you have to do every effort possible in order to extend the time frame of the artwork, in order that the publics can see and can experience the work. And that also that you are trying to think already the moment that the work cannot be there anymore for material reasons, how you can continue the life of this artwork in different forms, in documentation and etc. etc. And I think that's a way in terms also of this. We are building and building bigger things and bigger storages in order to store more and more and more and more. I think in terms of a kind of sustainable approach to collections, I think it's also an invitation to think on this also in other ways. And for instance, also to find out, to think of frameworks which are reasonable and which are communicative. We have in the museum the very first piece of Marcel Brotaars, the Belgian art. He's having a show in Cultuurgest soon, I saw. And we have the very first work Brotaars ever made, called Pense Bête. So he was a poet turned into, and so on and so on. And this piece is a piece of 1964. And it's like, it fits on this table. And it are his poem albums, which he turned into a sculpture with plaster and so on, and put some paper around it. And the piece was in the living room of the collector for ages. Till 10 years ago, we could acquire it miraculously, thanks to the fact that that's a funny story. There was a painting of Luc Tuymans, who got lost in a fire in Holland. We loaned a painting of Luc Tuymans on a fire in Holland, and thanks to this, we could buy the Brotaars. So, how destruction helps other things. But so the piece, there is a kind of rule of the government that as the Pense Bête of Marcel Brotaars is considered a masterpiece, the work only can be shown for 1 month every 5 years. As if we deal with the drawing of Dürer, or as if it is like a kind of, unique 12th century, I don't know what, totally against the intention of the artist itself. The piece is not fragile at all, according to me. But like not showing it and hiding it for the public makes it fragile. Which means also making it travel to, imagine if there would be a question of cultuurgest, to loan it is not possible. The piece cannot be loaned anymore, so it fits, it sticks, it sits, it dies, it's getting sad, it cries in the storage of the museum. Then I prefer to think on a methodology, on a way to show it with the public, to show it as much as we can, to extend the exhibition of the work to the public, and to accept that one day or another the Pensbijt will not be there anymore. Interestingly, so we had then the piece removed, and the widow of Marcel Broodhaars, who is still alive, Maria Gillissen, I called her and I said, listen, the government has this rule to not show the work, because it's in Ghent, but it belongs to the Flemish government. So we are not the owner, but we are the caretaker. And so I told Maria Gillissen, listen, the piece cannot be shown anymore. And she said, okay, doesn't matter, Philippe. Marcel would be as happy with a photograph of the piece than of the piece itself. And how beautiful, how fantastic. And that's exactly what I would define under the section homeopathic and palliative care of artworks. I have to admit, I wrote a long text about it, and I sent the text to our restorers and conservators to know their opinion and to start a dialogue about it. And so they wrote me back, but their answers were rather short, namely interesting. So, which means I touched a delicate point, but it's what I wanted to touch is the dialogue, to try to think about it, how to reflect on the midterms and how habits which we are doing already for years and years and years, and which we accepted as the way of doing things, how they could be gently modified into something else. Kill your darlings with moderation and gentleness. Very important. Or with gentleness and moderation, that's up to your character, I think. Museums and education. I think this thing is almost in the middle of the 11 things. And there is a reason why, because I think this should be, if we think about the future of museums, which brings me back to the first question, then I think this is at the core of the whole operation. If you would look internationally at the social economic profile of visitors, museum visitors, or people participating in contemporary art, unfortunately, we will see that most of the people are having university degrees, so highly educated, that they are from the income categories which are also more prosperous. So which means that only a very small percentage of the population finds access to the museum. And whereby the ICOM definition talks about inclusion and accessibility. But on the other hand, if we make this kind of universal enquête, repetitively we see the same kind of public coming. This is something saddening. This is something which I think we should, or which I think, okay, I would love to have to open up the museum for as much people as possible, whatever this means. And then I think there is one tool which might generate the biggest opportunities or the biggest chances for change, and that's education and schools. But schools from, you have even schools when the baby is still in the belly, so even these kind of schools. But let's say from 4 years old till, and so on and so on. because schools give the biggest guarantee that you touch all layers of society, without exception. So you're able to reach people for whom maybe to pay the entrance to a museum is not evident, or for whom there are other obstacles, whatever kind of obstacle, or who don't feel well in a museum, or don't feel welcome in a museum, or think, okay, that's not my business, or it will not be my world, or whatever. So I think that schools and schooling is the catalyzer or the catalysator of change of publics. And therefore I think that in every museum there should be a school inside. We are planning, we have a new museum project. I will show you one thing about it, but I will not go in depth in it. But we would like to have in the future museum building, in the collection building, schools, like even a kindergarten, like places and classrooms with works of the collection that you come to the museum, you get mathematics, but once you don't get it or you get bored, you look at the walls and suddenly you're taken by one or another piece of the collection of the museum, that you're surrounded by this. There is this fantastic, wonderful piece of Ilya Kabakov, the Russian artist, which is in the collection of the Hamburger Kunsthalle. And it's like a kind of this Soviet-like hospital room, and it's a bed, and painted with this green, and then the parquet, and you hear the noises, because for him, everything was important as a total installation. And in front of you, you have this kind of painting. So you're healing by painting, or I don't forget the title. But this idea that you're like in a kind of that immersion, if you talk then about experience and the immersive, well, then the school should be immersed by the museum, in the museum. And now, of course, every museum has their educational duties, and of course you have a certain percentage of students who come to the museum, or youngsters, or whatever, mostly thanks to a teacher who is like motivated and interested. But it's also exclusive when it depends that you have a motivated teacher who brings you to the museum. Should not depend on this. It should not depend on nothing. So the accessibility should be kind of guaranteed by, in a logic, like you drink a glass of water, and not in the logic of the exception. But which means also that the education, like now, which is still taught very in a positivistic way, at least in Belgium. I don't know how it is in Portugal, but if you're 10, you learn mathematics and all these kind of things, and some language, but you're being trained to be an efficient engine for society. But culture and art and music and all these things has been erased from the curriculum, as it's a waste of time, as it's not meaningful. Imagine if 1 day a week, on 5 days, 1 day a week, schools would spend time in the school and the museum. I think in 10 years from here, or in 15 years from here, we would have another totally other sensitivity, according to me. And I think how to achieve this, it's not easy. Often I try to talk to like the Minister of Education to say, okay, make this connection with culture more, or also on a local level. But that doesn't work, because there are like 150 people knocking on his door with good ideas or bad ideas. So the change has to come from the institution itself, by really making, by doing it as I'm saying it, by making classrooms in the museum, and by making, eventually, if it's possible, to move the whole infrastructure of a school inside the museum. And you might think I'm nuts. It's possible, but that doesn't matter. But you'll see in a second why I say this. But according to me, the education will in the future not only be the emancipation of the public, but will also be the emancipation of the museum itself. Because more and more, like, public funding is going down, which means you have to rely on private funding or proper revenues and so on and so on. And private funding generates also kind of, another kind of another ecology in terms of programming maybe, and so on and so on. So if you can stress the function, the educational function of the museum, there are some kind of sustainable long-term guarantees for the institution. As you're not serving one goal, you're not even serving two goals, but you're certainly serving a potential of social change. Be curious and generous. And this we have to practice every day. Museums and fragility. This is something, the art is at the center of the museum's operations. That's for us, this I learned from my predecessor. That's if there is one law in Ghent, then this is the law. Blind, not blind, but kind of super commitment towards the artist, and a kind of extreme respect towards the artist. Before João, we were talking on an artist, and he was saying, is this not a difficult artist? And I was answering João, saying, I don't think there exist difficult artists. There are artists who are not well treated by a museum, who then become difficult, So it's important that as an institution you have all ears and hands and legs and all you have to understand the artist you're inviting in the museum. And I think sometimes I see this changing, and I see this disappearing. It's not a kind of, or maybe yes, or maybe no, it's not a kind of romantic idea of stressing the artist, no. It's a kind of respect and admiration for the unique quality of fragility with which an artist operates. I fail, I wouldn't be capable. And therefore I think part of the museum being a school, it also has to be a shelter and a refuge. Something which protects the artists, but also which protects the public, and whereby this shelter or this refuge is the membrane, a kind of very sensible membrane between these two, and how to make these two connect and dialogue. For instance, we had a show with an artist, Anne Dash, an American artist, and she didn't want no mediation for the exhibition, but nothing, just name and a title and no text and so on and so on. And which from my position then, I think, okay, we have to respect this. It's important to listen to it carefully. But at the other hand, we have also kind of responsibility and duty and respect towards the visitor. And then it's our duty to see what kind of membrane can you be as a museum between these two. What do you do? How do you do it? For instance, the exhibition of Christoph Büchel that I mentioned, he didn't want to be mentioned as an artist. He wanted to disappear completely. He didn't want to have a press release. He didn't want to have no communication. So we know if we would have done communication, it would be like the Scandal exhibition, and it would be visited by 10,000s. But we respected the intentions of the artists. So we didn't put up posters. We camouflaged with him. The museum camouflaged as he expected to do so. And this asks for courage and to be prepared for things. But this is important to try to answer and to share and to maybe double the artist's fragility as far as it is possible. And in that sense, of course, I think the museum is the locus of doubt, of not knowing, of uncertainties, of failures, of instead of the contrary. Museums and the world. The first question is, of course, which worlds? Because there are many worlds. Let's say the world. And every one of us, when we talk about the world, has immediately like this and this and this. Maybe Trump appears and the wars appear and Palestine appears and, you know, and what's happening in Congo now appears and the growing inequality appears and, you know, we all have like ideas about the worlds. Maybe also good things, positive things, not only conflict things. But the world is always a big question, always in relation to Museum for Contemporary Art. For sure, in the context we live in today, every society or every country tends to look inwards. We see it in the position towards migration, for instance. So we have the tendency to close our eyes for everything which is foreign, and foreign in the multiple meanings that foreign can have. So we try to focus on the local. Last year we had an exhibition with the Lebanese artist Tarek Atwi, who makes this fantastic sound sculptures, let's say. And then someone in the museum was saying, yeah, but you know, why should we invite Tarek Atwi, whereby we have also in Antwerp someone who makes sound sculptures, you know? That's a bit also the world we live in, this kind of inward-looking tendency. So how can you have this, how can you be sensitive for the need and the attention for the local, because it's important. Again, it's what I observe, I don't see as negative, but as a phase in which we're going through, and so which you have to be able to read and to absorb and to translate in actions. But at the same time, of course, as contemporary art has, from the onset also in '57 in the museum and from always has a kind of internationality in it. At the same time, also this you don't want to lose. You want to have these two legs, you know. The question is on which, if you move like this, on which leg do you want to stand the longest? And also there again, it's how can you, the phase that we are going through, because we go through cycles, how can you prepare now in order to guarantee that the international is still part of your scheme in the coming 10 years? Sometimes I talk to colleagues and I wonder, imagine like the extreme right wing is strong in Flanders. And sometimes I fantasize, but fantasize is not a good word, but let's say it. I fantasize that the Minister of Culture would be from the right wing. And then we discuss, what are we going to do? Will we still accept the money if the the Minister of Culture will be right wing? Which conditions will we accept? Imagine if he says, okay, you get money from Flanders on the condition that 80% of the artists are local, or if you do this and that and that. So we can easily say we are against this and against a Minister of Culture from the right wing, but there is a potentiality that within this and the next coming 10 years, this might happen. So you have to think now, how do you want your core values of a museum be guaranteed and defended, even if you have to go through such a period of time? It's not an easy question. I also don't have answers yet, because as I told you in the beginning, Ghent is a very particular context, like a kind of progressive enclave. Financially, we depend mostly on the city, so I could easily say to Flanders, keep your money, and we do it with it less. But that's not the case for other colleagues, and so you have also to think not only about the museum, but about the whole ecology of contemporary art. The same as questions about, what I said, like stability versus conflict. then I mean, and it's a question I have, you know, I struggle with it. How to cope, which position can you take as a museum in relation to everything which happens in Palestine? Should we be happy if we just put a poster in the museum, and if we post some posts on Instagram and all social media as a museum, that we say, okay, we're against this and that? Is this what we should do? Can we take a position? I do know that a lot of institutions are not allowed to take any position, or really shut off this kind of things. In Antwerp, for instance, the museums are not allowed to take a position. If they do, it stops immediately. But I struggle. You know, we had in the beginning of what was happening in Gaza, we had a poem in the entrance hall of the museum. And then I think, okay, that's it. That's what we can do. That's how we are capable to relate. But then I think, okay, at least we do it, and at least maybe museums by the end we are symbolic places. Maybe it helps in one way or another. But it's a question. How can we, from the comfortable, stable position in an art world who likes to address a lot of bigger identitarian, social, political, post-colonial debates, how can we really tackle it? How can we really do something about it? And admit that you're more conservative than you think. It's really coincidental that these two things came always together. Then do know that art is useless, but the only perspective to imagine a future. As long as I believe in this, I will keep on going. If I don't believe in this anymore, then I will become a truck driver. But I'm not the truck driver yet, as you see, because I'm here. There I have like 3 things, and that's more into the... I want to focus on Victoria Beckham and Marcel Brotaers. And the false naivety is something like, okay, we know the interferences between museums and economy. I think in our case it's still okay because like we're a small scale place and have not this kind of kind of big financial inputs from private companies or whatever. But Victoria Beckham, it's something, I'm not an admirer of Victoria Beckham, but I was this weekend reading something fascinating in the Financial Times, that apparently she has a brand, fashion brand, and a shop. Was new for me. João knew it. No? But she made a kind of a deal with Sotheby's, the auction house, that namely now when you visit her shop in London, that there are pieces by Kondo and Basquiat and, you know, artists, Murakami and so on and so on, in order to intensify your shopping pleasure, in order to, you know, to connect two status-oriented things, namely fashion and contemporary art. When I read this, I'm not, you know, I could be like angry or disgusted or whatever, but I'm fascinated, and I thought, okay, I take the train to London. I want to see this shop with my own eyes, but at the same time, I'm also a little bit getting worried. In that sense, that once or often, not always, money comes in, the money can do very weird things with people. It's an observation, you know, and of course, the Victoria Beckham is a pars pro toto for the fact that Hauser and Wirth on the countryside in Somerset has this kind of also shop with old aging meat, and that you first go to lunch and then maybe buy a piece by I don't know whom. So you see that there is a kind of whole, because of the bigger influence and the bigger impact of economy, there's a whole shift in attention and value of art. And maybe I'm still from a kind of, that's why I was saying in terms of the collection, this idea of utopias and so on and so on. That's something sometimes I have to get used to. But that's part of the change that is about happening. And then an anecdote in terms of Marcel Brotaars. There was a Belgian collector, Izzy Viesman, and he was, I knew he passed like 6 or 7 years ago. And, you know, he would be offended if I would call him a collector, but he had a strong connection and personal rapport with artists like Beuys and Hanna Darboven, artists from that generation, and also with Marcel Brotaars. And he went once to the White Space Gallery in Antwerp, which was like this in the late 60s, 70s. There were no museum of contemporary art in Belgium, but White Space had a very particular place. And Izzy Viesman bought a piece by Marcel Brotaars in the presence of Marcel Brotaars, like with eggs and these egg shells. And Izzy Viesman told to Brotaars, listen, I buy it, but I pay you cash immediately, but I'm going to destroy the piece on the spot. Showing for himself as a collector that he was not interested in the objects, but in the intellectual, conceptual discourse of the artists, and also in the support that he wanted to give to the artists. And so he trashed the piece on the ground. And to make a very long story a little bit shorter, Brotaars took the broken things, made another piece with it, which is now part of the collection of the Centre Pompidou in Paris. You know, so the relation with money and economy and all these things is sometimes not innocent. And then embrace the world and get lost in it. I think I touched already about a lot of things in relation to museums and social change. The symbolic I was bringing up when I talked on the how you can cope, you know, with bigger crises. What about our impact, our real impact? I think often we underestimate the impact that we can have. And I think that we can have a bigger impact if we would be willing to be more audacious. You know, the tryout and the failure at the same time with the Extinction Rebellion. You know, this raised the debate and generated a consciousness and opened up now even invitations for extinctions to projects in other museums. I think we underestimate what we can really mean for society. And so which means we should come more out of our own zone and try to connect more with other realms of society. And then this brings me to this. Just dots. All the things I couldn't think of, all things I don't think about yet, but maybe I'm supposed to think about, and all the things I forgot to mention, and also that everything that I put in order has no order, could also be having in a different order. And maybe I want to say something also about this. But maybe just to say where these 11 lines that I mentioned, embrace the world and know that everything is uncertain. This is something that I was doing. I was asked for a speech on an academy in Hasselt in Belgium. And I thought, okay, again I have to talk about the same thing but in other words, or other words for the same thing. And I didn't feel like to talk about, again, the same thing, and so on and so on. So I invented these 11 commandments between brackets. And I did as if I didn't write them, but the director of the academy wrote them. and as if I found them by accident and was sharing them unexpectedly with the audience. And I wrote them as a kind of guide, or a kind of, like you plant flowers in your garden, to which you can look now and then when they blossom or not, or whatever they do, as a guide to artists in the middle of their development of being artists, still in their study, still in their, because also the one about success, what I say, and it's not about success, and don't consider success as a consequence, not as a goal, but consider as a consequence. I do see that now, and often in academies, many artists go there with a goal to have success. I'm interested, it's fascinating. But so I wanted to have like this kind of sentences, like a flower, like a bouquet of flowers to them, to do with them what they like. And since then, actually, with almost every lecture I give wherever I can, I bring them in one way or another, because they are applicable to many and different contexts. Even if I would talk tomorrow to engineers or to digital experts or whatever, I think it says something about the art world, or the world we try to navigate in. But as the art world is part of the world, and as there is a kind of permanent resonance between the two, and a capacity to grasp the resonation, these things are useful. And then I want to share you this very briefly, because this would be 2 hours more to talk about it. But we have a building in Ghent, which is end of life, which is not apt anymore to function as a museum. We have a collection which is not on view, as the building is not apt and the building is too small. So we're in the midst of a new project, and that's why I came in with the schools and the idea of schools. So this big hall, which is there, this will be the playground for all the kids in the future who go to school inside of the museum. The project, I'm working on this project already for about 15 years. And it should, if everything goes well, and I always think that most things go very well, the opening should be in 2032. But I still have to find a bit of finances. And then finally, I would like to read you this list. That's all things. This morning, I was thinking, okay, which things will I not be able to talk about? So I just, if you don't mind, read this aloud. Joëlle Leandre, she's an incredible, I will just say one sentence. She's an incredible bass player, student of Morten Feldman, and close friend of John Cage, and an incredible, musician in terms in improvisation. Birds, that's a personal obsession. Palestine, yes. We touched it. The Super Bowl, that's brings us to the United States and all the worries we can have about that. Artificial intelligence. Sofia Gubaidulina, she's a fantastic Russian composer who lives close by to Hamburg, and who is 90-something, and I would love to meet, but I think it will never happen. Inequality, improvisation. This brings me to the book of Derek Bailey, a British guitar player, who wrote a book about improvisation, which I recommend to everyone, because it's not talking only about improvisation within jazz, but also the Indian raga tradition, cross-cultural. It's fantastic. I gave the book once. We have a human relation person in the museum, and she gave me a book about her fields of activity, and said, okay, I will respond your book with a gift from mine. So I gave her the book of Derek Bailey, but she didn't grasp it why I gave a book on improvisation to her and about music, but that exactly what it is, like managing people there is a part of improvisation in it, and we often misunderstand what is the notion of improvisation. Psychosis, Kumari, the living goddess in Kathmandu, climate change. Lina Bobardi, the Dogon, which brings me to a dear friend, Yusuf Dara, long story. Euthanasia. I think Portugal is one of the few countries with Belgium where it's legalized. Marilyn Crispell, incredible American piano player. Latif Al-Ani, Iraqi photographer, which brings me back to my Iraqi experiences, who passed 2 years ago, so it's in homage to him. Dirt, because I like it. Henri Michaud, because I like him. Onychophagia, because I practice it every day. Do you know what it is? Nail biting. I'm a professional nail biter. Nina Kalou, she's a British artist, and she's the first, I worked together with her, and she's the first artist with learning disabilities who entered the collection of Tate Modern. The work is incredible. Annie Ernaux, the writer, because she's a knife. Poverty, because it's, I'm worried about all these things. Moondog, because of his exceptional life. He was this musician living in the streets, buried in Münster and so on. Sticks, because I collect them, branches of wood. Mitu Sen, Indian artist I like, and Henry Cowell, an incredible, remarkable, forgotten composer. And then finally, a sentence out of the book of Derek Bailey by T.C. Whitmer, which is an organ specialist in the 30s. Do not be afraid of being wrong, just be afraid of being uninteresting. Obrigado. Voilà.
Thank you so much, Philippe Van Cauteren. Now we have some time to change ideas. It's a small auditorium, but yeah, Denise. So the microphone can go hand on hand, okay? There are no assistants.
Hello, first of all, I would like to congratulate you. I'm a PhD student at Antwerp University, so I go to S.M.A.K often, and it's quite tangible, the difference of atmosphere between the S.M.A.K and the museums in Antwerp or even in Brussels. We can the exhibition of Grace Nadiru, Healing the Museum, was incredible.
Thank you.
But about the expansion of the S.M.A.K, how do you locate that plan of expansion with in relation to the sort of last 10 years fever of expansion that all museums around the world are doing? And my second, if I may, question would be with the rise in straightening of the right wing in Flanders and the new prime minister, which is from right wing. How do you analyze its impact on S.M.A.K?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the first question about the extension and the fever. Huh?
Yes, the extension of S.M.A.K,
yes.
Which I know is very, it's a long idea, it's a very old idea.
Yes.
But we have the extension of the fever of extensions of museums in the last 10 years for another reasons.
Yes.
And I would like you to think about that connection or that not completely difference. Or
well, I wanted to start to take up the word fever in your question. That the difference is that we don't have fever, and that the other ones have fever. Huh? To put it like this. But why do I say this? First of all, that Belgium is small. At the moment, there is no collection for contemporary art visible, nowhere. M.A.K has like a room smaller than this one, where they show like 15 works. In our case, it's also sometimes yes and sometimes no, depending on the temporary exhibitions. Or the project of Grace, and she was making a selection of the collection that she then showed. In Ostend, there are mostly the modern and older Belgian artists. Brussels, the Royal Museum closed down their contemporary wing to give more attention to Art Nouveau and René Magritte. Grand Ornu in the south also can't show the collection. So basically, there is no place for tourists, but for schools, for education, for people who just love art. No place where you can see the art of the second half of the 20th century. Nowhere. And we have like 4,000 works in the basement, in the depot, of which we think 500 works should be shown. But which can't happen because of the current condition. So the fever has to do with the collection, not the fever. The fever has not to do with city marketing and has nothing to do with kind of, okay, we need a bigger museum. The fever has to do with the fact that the building we have now looks as if it is a museum, but the museum isn't still built yet. To make a long story short, the building opened in 1999. My predecessor, Jan Hoet, he went into politics, namely the Catholic Party, because his idea was because the missing lamb of Van Eyck is Catholic heritage. That's why he went to the Catholic Party. And he went into politics to get a museum, and he achieved it, because then the city said, we give him the museum, we don't want him in the city hall. If you knew the character, you know what I mean. So means suddenly there was like, they said, okay, this building we change into a museum, but it was it thought of as a museum? Yes, of course, but it was just a kind of the facade, the appearance of a museum. So actually, so far in Belgium, also M.A.K is not, is a renovation. There is a general lack of decent, and I don't talk about spectacular, but decent infrastructure for contemporary art. And so which means we have the architects, it's NOAA architects, David Kohn and Asli Cicek. They decided to make, this image looks spectacular, but we decide to make pavilions which have a discreteness within the park. So the footprint of the building will be smaller than today. So we have the dialogue with the University Museum and the Fine Arts Museum and so on and so on. But it's out of a really core necessity in order to make the museum function within this and the coming 5 to 10 years. We have an exhibition now with Tsai-Ming Liang, the filmmaker, fantastic. But we have to close the room because the glasses fell down. We can't open, for the last month of the exhibition, we can't open the room anymore because it's dangerous for the visitors. So there is just a kind of basic need in order to get it done. So in that sense, when I heard recently that Maxi in Roma is making an extension and all these extensions and Tate Liverpool is building an extension, we are not in this logic. We are like just in the logic, how can we make basic good conditions in order to welcome the visitor, make exhibitions and show the collection. And of course, the site is unique, as you know it. You have this big hall. The museum will be, now you're on one side of the hall, we have a second volume on the other side, and probably the depot, which will be under and connected to, the hall will be open to the public and to the inhabitants and so on, because this hall is not to be used now. So it will be a project whereby it's not only about the museum, but it's also about just a kind of new whole dynamic and ecology involving schools and all the things I've been mentioning. And then the second element. Belgium, we have a lot of governments. We have a Flemish one, a Brussels one, a Flemish, a Brussels, a Walloon. Let me start again. We have a Flemish one, a Brussels one, a French one, a German one, a federal one. So 5 pieces. If you would divide this into the square meters of the country, it would be insane. Also the number of politicians. But so last week, we finally have the federal government. And the big paradox is that the prime minister of the federal government is someone of a party who believes in an independent Flemish state. So we have a separatist who is the prime minister for Belgium. Luckily, we are the country of surrealism, which might make it understandable a bit, but it's a very worrying situation. And it's not, culture doesn't depend on it, because the cultural responsibilities are in the regions. But of course, there is a mindset which is very worrying. His name is Bart de Wever. He was also the mayor of Antwerp. And he has this whole fascination with the Roman Empire. He identifies himself with Augustus, with Emperor Augustus. He has a Roman helmet in the cabinet of the prime minister. You know, he has a statue of Augustus. He has like this SPQR thing, and so on and so on. And last week there was a little interview with him in his office, and how he liked his office. And at this moment of time, there is a work of Rinus van de Velde, a Belgian artist, contemporary artist, which is in the office. And he says, listen, this contemporary, he didn't say shit, but he was thinking shit. This contemporary crap thing should go. I want something, you know, solid, heritage, you know. So you feel that his mindset and the way he's looking, because he's like conservative right, not extreme right, but he comes from a family which was who were collaborating in the Second World War, and he had sympathy with the VNV. Joris van this will bring us. This is a history lesson which will bring us too far, but it's a worrying situation, you know. And the thing is that already 20 years is the most powerful person controlling Belgian politics, and now finally he achieves the position which might make the disintegration of Belgium more a reality. But us, in fact, it will not jeopardize the new building, for instance, because the party, yes, because the party, Flanders, the minister-president of Flanders is of the same party. And in Ghent, in the local political constellation, they kicked out his party. So that's interesting. So Ghent was fighting. There were big protests in the streets of Ghent not to make a coalition with this party. So this party is everywhere in all the administrations. It's everywhere invaded, except in this kind of very strange island, Ghent. Looks like the village of the comic strips of Asterix, something like this. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Denise. Paulini. Mais ideias? Alguém quer partilhar uma nova Natal?
Thank you for your brilliant conference. I like very much, and congratulations. I was touched by the relation between education and the museum. And for me, I think it's more important that the collections are more, they can move, are more liquid. Not the idea of the school in the museum, but the opposite. The museum in the schools. I think, and today the collections are so, they can be exhibited in the museums. It's impossible if the collections are bigger and bigger. So I think it's to move, and also politically to integrate in all the programs, because the works of art, all the works of art, in particular the contemporary works of art, they are very meaningful. They can move. They can be inserted in mathematics, in geography, in the traditional disciplines, and I think it's. And I don't see that. You see, there is a separation between culture and education, university. I think it must be more transversal.
Can I say something?
It's a commentary.
Yeah, no, and I fully agree. And we already had like some tentatives of doing so. For instance, in 2019, so I will tell 3 stories, short, if you don't mind. So in 2019, through the radio, we did a public call, and we asked citizens of East Flanders, so part of Flanders, to send an email to the museum with a motivation if they wanted an artwork of our collection in their house. And so we had like 150 people writing. We made a selection of 10. We did a site visit to this house. And then we looked, okay, where are we? If it's a family with 3 young kids, you don't have to put a very fragile work. So you look a bit what fits in the context of the house. But for instance, there was one lady who had like a fitness studio, and there we decided to put a work of Vanessa Beecroft from the collection. And then another family, he was a carpenter, and his daughter started to study painting. And then we thought, okay, let's have a good painting of Raoul de Keyser in the house. So we did exactly what you said, and I think we should do more, but you have to change the mindset of the machinery, because the conservators of the museum say, but what happens if there is a damage? So they don't start from the trust. Imagine if I would give you tomorrow a piece, I trust you, and I'm sure you will take care of it. So the whole idea was that if you give a piece of the collection, of the public collection, to a family who asked for it, they will take care of it, as they take care of their children, and as if they take care of their garden and whatever. And if something happens, in most cases, it will be solvable. It will be not like a big problem. So which means that the whole logic of conservation and the whole institutional mindset should be deconstructed. And if we can't do this, we tried as if we can't, because our conservators thought and the restorers thought, but he's getting crazy. He's bringing a Vanessa Beecroft in a fitness studio. It can't be possible. So we have to change attitudes also in the institutions who think following very strict schemes. Secondly, we have something which is called S.M.A.K on wheels, and it's a box, something like this, and inside are all original artworks. No editions, but real pieces made by 20 artists. And this goes to hospitals for, namely, people who are chronically ill and who stay in the hospital for months, or who have to do revalidation, and so on and so on. So we go with the S.M.A.K on wheels and a guide, go to the hospital, and we perform this collection. So the box is opened, and the works are hung, or some are performed, because some things are instructions of things to do, and we bring this to this environment. And then there is an historical, fantastic example. The artist Jeff Gijs, I think he once had an exhibition long ago in Kulturgest with Miguel Wanschneider, I think, 15 years ago or something, but Jeff passed in the meantime. He was from a small village in Belgium, Balen. He lived there the whole his life. He was also a school teacher. And in 1978, he showed like 30 works of the collection of the museum in the classrooms. But all the key works, the Richter and Gilbert and George, and from that period of time. So it's possible. But back in those days, the machinery of value, of the machinery of monetarization was not present. At that moment of time, you had Richter, and okay, Jeff Gijs wants to show Richter, and we showed Richter in the school. If today we would like to do Richter in a school, there is a whole cascade of procedures and reflections and thoughts who will start to say, but it's not possible because of this reason, and of this reason, and of this reason. So we are in a kind of context of justification and of also a context where things we prefer to make things impossible than to make things possible. And that's sometimes for me personally a struggle, because I like to do things, to think things through in a way. But I totally agree. And I thank you to remind us that to do it more, because it's the both directions that you need.
Yes, it's an old idea, of art, not because art also has a value of use. It's not only symbolic.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that's also a contemporary problem.
Yeah.
And if we want to change, we have also to change a little bit the society in a politically, economically, social point of view.
But then you have to stop certain things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
As an institute or as a society, to think differently on the notion of value again.
But that starts in the school.
That starts in the school.
So the intervention in the school can be very surgical, but must to be effective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More ideas? Yes.
Obrigada. Thank you so much. This was very, very interesting. I would like to hear more about a number of concepts, and if you turn this into a book, I will surely want to read it. But I want to ask you about the notion of surface or surfacialization.
You pronounce it very well.
I'm struggling too. I think it's a very strong concept. You may grasp what is at stake, but is it a matter of pictorial or visual or distance? And how do you see it connecting or relating to the idea of user? Is there a tension there for you? Or what could you say about the idea of user in relation to this tendency of surface?
Well, most things I was bringing up are like observations based on my practice, and I'm not the biggest theoretician of Belgium. There is this beautiful phrase of Goethe, by the way, who said, theory is grey and life is green. And I think I'm a bit in between, grain or something, between the two colors. But why I came strongly to this, James Ensor is this fantastic, incredible Belgian artist, known of his paintings with the masks and so on and so on, which follows me since I'm a teenager. And he had there was now a kind of retrospective exhibition in the Fine Arts Museum in Antwerp. And already many artists were like warning me, don't go to see it because they made, what they did with the exhibition is painful, and maybe you saw it, Denise. Yeah, was painful, and they started with making silhouettes and colors and, as if the works of James Ensor didn't matter. Huh? And so you had like a beach cabin because he was from the seaside, and you had masks and your things. And I went to see the exhibition because I love Ensor too much not to go and see it. And there were loans from the States I had never seen. And then you observed that people, and maybe not everyone, but many people were more interested in the gadgets and in the copy of a painting than in the real one, which was hanging 3 rooms further, and who were like photographing like the shadow play. You could do like some shadow plays, and next doors were just hanging, like brilliant works of Ensor and others. And that's this is one kind of symptom of this superficialization. Like the fact that apparently the artwork itself is not enough of something to communicate with. And apparently, this human being is often also not enough or interesting to communicate with. If you sit on a bus or a train, everyone is like, chick, 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 chick. involved with the phone, and there is hardly any conversation. And I don't want to be moralistic about it, or say, okay, it was better before this or that. But there is no attraction to something which has a kind of profondeur, like a profundity. There is no attraction in reading books which have more than. I read a lot, and then people ask me, do you read everything or do you read diagonal? I say, no, I read everything, of course. I mean, so there is an abstinence from something which goes further than just the surface. And I think this has to do with the digital era. Like the digital image is by nature, flat. Like a photo was still appeared from somewhere, from the chemical process. But also in our human contact, we lose this kind of interest, or this kind of, we are judging in this or that. There is no spectrum anymore. We cannot, there is no room for ambiguity. There is no room for hesitation. There is no room. It is either this or either that. And this translates itself also in how people look at art, or how people look in museums. And I think it's this like the immersive or submersive. Gustav Klimt the whole oeuvre in 1 hour. €25. And then, okay, you don't have to travel anymore, because in 1 hour you get the whole thing. We had this wonderful Van Eyck exhibition in Ghent, briefly for Corona, and then it closed. And then there was like a kind of digital experience in the close to the cathedral. And I think many people took this for the real thing. So we're getting, like, I'm also interested in people who are happy just with the surface. I want to talk to them why they are just happy with the surface. I'm not. But it's something which also affects our profession, and it's also something which might also affect like a place like the university, ChatGPT, AI, all the things. Although I say we have to be lazy and inefficient, and often we're lazy in the wrong way. But it's something, I don't know the answers now, but something to dive in deeper and further. But it's everywhere, I think. It's even in pharmacies. Back in, like 10 years ago, pharmacy, it was like an artwork. And now a pharmacy, you have to be seduced to go and buy your medicines. And you get discounts in the pharmacy, and you get like all kind of things. So also there, nothing can be what it is. It has everything has to be shown as something else. So answer cannot be answer anymore. No, the exhibition has to be turned into a unique experience, and the artworks are like leftovers of which we take care. But it's the myth of Ensor and the clichés of Ensor, the man living Ostende, who was never married, who lived with his sister, who had a shop with shells and mussels and earth, and so on and so on. That's what, that matters. By the end, of course, the biography resonates in the painting, probably. But, and so what, But that's what is and this is being also put to the front by the spectator, by the museums for the spectator. I made an exhibition in Geel. It's a city in Belgium known for its psychiatric care since the Middle Ages, whereby patients were living together with families. So the patients were not in the hospital, but were living day and night with families. And my predecessor, his father was main psychiatrist of the hospital, Jan Hoed, and he grew up with his 5 brothers and sisters, but also with as many patients in the family. And Jan made his before passing away, he made his final exhibition there, also in relation to outsider art and stuff like this. And I was asked 2 years ago to make an exhibition. about this question of, outsider artists and so on and so on. And I thought, okay, I did it together with Pierre Meulen, we did the two of us, and I thought, okay, let's get rid of the of this dichotomy. Let's not be fascinated by the biography. Let's forget about the biography, but let's first look. And so we decided, we had like 60 artists, and we did a lot of research, let's say half between brackets, non-conformist artists, like they also call now, and then regular artists. And we decided to show everything without name tags. So you didn't know anymore, is this Juan Munoz, and is this Alessandra Michelangelo, and is this Mouse, and so on. No name tags. Things one next to each other. And we decided that the mediation texts for the show was not written by me or my colleague, but we showed before the exhibition, we showed all the pieces to citizens of the city. So we asked 5 people, inhabitants, randomly chosen, so not people interested in art, in the phone book, this one, and that one, 5 people. And they were saying, but I don't know nothing about art, and it doesn't matter. So we showed all the artworks in the show to these people. And they were like saying what they were thinking. And sometimes they were saying things that, were on the spot, nailed, let's say, bam, directly. And sometimes they were saying things which were like, totally something else. But they were saying what they were like experiencing. And once in a while we had to help a little bit. But that was the information for the visitor. So no tags and this. And, people who I knew who visited the show were saying, yeah, I was tired after the show because I had to look. I was not invited to read, but I had to look to what I saw. So this was an exhausting experience. And then I think, fantastic. That's what we need to do. We need to look at the things and to wonder what we are confronted with, and not to be, we have to dive into what we get and and so that was an exercise as an answer to this, and then wondering, okay, that was in that context. Would it be possible to extend this to the museum? What would it mean if we would do it on a larger scale? Would it be, we discussed then with our mediation team, and they said, but no, you cannot show an art piece without a label. And you have to have this, and you have to that. So, but you have to try to how can you remold the whole thing, and how can you make it more liquid, more. But I was walking away a bit from your question, but it has to do a lot with all these things. Reality is painful.
Very painful. Maybe because of. So maybe it's that. It's the real today is something very painful, and I don't know, the surface. It's more easy.
Yeah.
Also, it's more easy to move, to change. If you don't like, we change. So to be confronted with the persons and the reality of the works and so on, it's the reality of the work, of the world.
But it will change in 6 years. Yeah. No, it will,
Oh, hello. Thank you for your presentation. Very nice to meet you. My question is, isn't it idealistic to think that art is for everyone? And I see that it's a struggle, really, to bring art to everyone, to all publics. And I guess that's what education comes, that's why you think about bringing the school into the museum. That's one question. And then I think it's a bit the continuation of it. When you think about the public as users, aren't you bringing art to the level of superficiality that you were criticizing before.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't like speaking in public, so.
No, but it's, no. So the first, on your first question, my answer is brief, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
No, yes, of course, it's a bit idealistic, but that's the only way possible. You know, if I imagine if I would not have this ideal, then I wouldn't be interested, maybe. No, I mean, I think that's it has also to do with the story of the museum. Why, you know, that's what I was saying. This every place asks for a certain answer, and you have to try to feel the contexts. And the museum, we had a collection before we had a building, so we were always a nomadic house. We made in '86 an exhibition, Chambre d'Amis, in private houses of the inhabitants of the city. While they were living, we had an exhibition called Rendezvous, whereby citizens of the city were bringing objects to the museum, and then Henk Fisch, Huang Yongping, Jimmy Durham, and Kabakov were making installations with it. So we had always had this kind of looking for a kind of rapport to an as large audience as possible. And of course, I know we will not achieve it, but it's our duty to try and to fail again and again. And then also, of course, in the idea of the user, there is a risk. And there is a risk of exactly that happens what I would like to happen. But it's exactly by trying certain things that you better understand where you're going to. Handing over half of the museum to these youngsters, it's by doing it that we now know, okay, how would we do it again? Or what wouldn't we do anymore? Or what could be the next step to do? Or what did we get from it?
Yeah, no, it seems like a paradox to work in a museum, to try to make art, or to give the idea that art is very valuable, and at the same time bring it down to everyone, and whereby sometimes art is just something ephemeral, an idea, and something that is important today because we made it, but it's not important tomorrow, or to preserve it even.
Yeah. But I like the paradox.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that I want
territory.
Yeah, to say this as an easy answer, but I like the you know. We try to bring in, like, sometimes complex exhibitions. We're trying to look to find an as large audience as possible. You know, and it's nice when you know, okay, we achieved this unexpectedly. This is achieved with that exhibition. I think it's nice for the team. It's nice for all of us, and it's also nice to bring people in contact with things they don't know yet. And sometimes someone writes you to the museum and say, okay, I saw the exhibition of Javier Tellez in 1900 and 2000 and so on, and this made me decide to go and go and study film. And I think, okay, 1-0, you know, at least one person, but I don't mind the paradox and the ambiguity. Also with Extinction Rebellion, it's paradox. But it's through trying the paradox that you also understand your own limits as an institution. But you question them. You know, you try to leave your safe position. It's easy to say, okay, you, Extinction Rebellion, it's not okay that you glue yourself to the wall, to the painting. I was thinking, damn, how smart. You know, an international publicity with €10, like a box of glue, €10. And we spent campaigns with posters in the city, with few effect for thousands and thousands. So you have to get inspired. But it's paradoxical at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just I don't know if there are more ideas. I would like to share some ideas to close the session because it's already long maybe, but thank you so much, Philippe Van Cauteren, for your presentation, and I think that was so interesting to see these two movements from 1 to 11 and the other one, 11 to 1, in between a series of intellectual topics on one hand, and on the other hand, meditations or more poetical sentences. So this double movement is about tension, and it's about paradox, and that's about life. We are not searching for answers, we are searching for questions in life and in university in particular. So this is not a mess, this is a training place. And you talk about learning practices, exercises, and open collaborations, and I think is very, very inspiring, because we want curators like you who are searching for new ways and new approaches, and not traditional curators that are too certain of themselves or about the art world that is changing very quickly. And I'm thinking, you talk about the radical wing, right wing on the political level, but I'm questioning if we will not see soon artists and curators and directors from radical right wing coming into the art world, or if they are not already working inside of it very slowly. So it will change politically very fast in Europe, or in America also, well, everywhere maybe, I don't know. But it's changing, and it's not external to the art world. It's inside the house already. So how can we see it? Well, I'm just I'm just sharing some thoughts, thinking about what Manuel Valente Alves told. 15 years ago, there was a wonderful project of Thomas Hirschhorn that was Musée Précaire, where he took the collection of Pompidou Center to the suburbia of Paris and showed masterpieces in tents and in very precarious conditions, touching the problems or the limits of institutions. And he did it with Laboratoire d'Aubervilliers, with a very interesting institution. So just to finish, and you talk about hospitals and prisons and the museum as a playground, or all these dimensions of how the arts can come to the others. It's very interesting. And I wanted to listen to you a little bit more about, just finish maybe, Grace did it too, because Grace I saw the exhibition in S.M.A.K. I was very touched by her exhibition, and she came to talk in this cycle in February, and she did a wonderful lecture. And she is in between fields: sociology, activism, art, decolonial thought, care and cure. Can you talk a little bit about this experience with Grace did it too as a curator?
Well, it was Anne Hoste who was curating the exhibition, but I can speak about one specific project that I don't know, of which I'm not sure that Grace thought about it. But we have every year, since 4 years, an artist in residence in the museum. Sounds, if we think on an artist in residence, then we think, okay, the artist has a studio or a place to work, and voila. But in our case, we see the artist in residence, and then the residence is finalized with a presentation. But in our case, the artist in residence is an invitation to an artist to engage with the whole organization, if the artist wants. So there are no obligations. There's just a very open invitation, which means not only with the curatorial team, which means it can be with the technical team, with the production team, it can be with, everything is available, and there is access to everything. So there is there are no no's, basically. And so also the failure of the museum can be part of it. So Grace was one of the artists in residence. She was the third one. And she decided to engage with everyone, like a former artist in residence decided just to focus on the communication team, but Grace wanted to deal with from the cleaning ladies to the whole everyone who's working in the museum. So with the cleaning team, she was there like 7 in the morning and so on with the guards, and she knew everyone and she was part of everyone. And she was this kind of, how to say, like a unique spokesperson. So maybe some people were going to Grace to say, okay, you know, I don't like the coffee so much, or don't know what that they talked about. It was between them. And then we already scheduled the exhibition. And then, so the idea is that there is an output of the residence, but the output is preferably not an exhibition or a presentation. The output should be different in one way or another. And in the case of Grace, it will be a science fiction novel. So she's currently writing a science fiction novel about the museum, which I'm looking forward to read, of course. And which I hope that, based on exactly what you were saying, that she's dealing with care and the colonial and all these things, that the science fiction novel might also be a manual, like she likes to make, like be a manual for the team and us, in order to guide us towards the next steps of the museum. But she's she was here. Huh? I mean, I don't have to tell who she is. Huh? But it's. She learned me to meditate, which I didn't do before, to say one thing. But it's exceptional also because in one room she made this kind of temple structure where she made a selection out of the collection of the museum. And it was extremely surprising which works that she was like pulling out of the storage. Really fantastic how she did. Voila.
And Philippe Van Cauteren, thank you so much for your lecture and your time. And before we close and we clap your quality, let me just do in Portuguese an invitation to everybody. Deixo-vos convite amanhã. Passem a palavra, por favor, a amigos, a toda a comunidade artística. Amanhã, às 6h30 da tarde, recebemos aqui Manuel Santos-Maia, um importante artista plástico português, que tem uma exposição neste momento na Galeria Quadron, de que eu sou o curador, e vem amanhã às 6h30 apresentar o filme Alhava, que é um filme magnífico, feito a partir de filmes Super 8 que o pai rodou em Nampula, Moçambique, antes da descolonização, comentados pelo próprio há 10 anos, 30 anos ou 40 anos depois da descolonização. É um filme de 30 minutos, tensíssimo, um filho a filmar o pai no seu testemunho colonial, pós-colonial. É um filme extraordinário. E o Manuel Santos-Maia vai, a partir do filme, falar sobre a sua obra, 25 anos a trabalhar a memória colonial, pós-colonial e decolonial em torno de Nampula. Amanhã às 6h30 da tarde, nesta sala. Segunda-feira, às 6h30, recebemos Maria João Gordão e o João Fiadeiro, que vão apresentar-nos um outro filme também magnífico sobre o desmantelamento da Real, chamado Nada Pode Ficar, um filme rodado pela Maria João Gordão, dedicado à Real, companhia do João Fiadeiro. 6h30 da tarde. E, por último, na quarta-feira seguinte, portanto, de amanhã a 8 dias, recebemos Francisco Tropa, que nos vai falar às 3 da tarde da sua exposição no Museu de Serralves e, a partir daí, de toda a sua obra. Sintam-se convidados, passem a palavra, por favor, para sermos muitos e bons. E agora sim, peço uma salva de palmas ao Philippe Van Cauteren. Thank you so much.
No, fantastic.